Okay, in this video I'm going to walk through the steps here to add validation using Spring inside your MVC projects. Okay, and in this version I'm going to start with the CamperMVC_JPA project. This is one that already has JPA implemented, although it doesn't have validation yet. So I'll start with this project. And that's available inside the CIS 2232 2017 2018 Part 2 repository from Bitbucket. Alright, so I'm just going to make sure this runs. I have my databases created and the project should run successfully. Right, while that's starting, I'm going to start looking at these requirements. So in order to add validation, I already have a project with JPA. So it has a repository, it has an entity class created from the database. Oops, not remote files. Alright, so if I go look at my Spring Data JPA package, this is where my repository is. This is an interface that extends the CRUD repository. That was done in the last video, setting up JPA in the project. I also have a model in my model JPA package here. There it goes, just launched. But I've got a camper project, or camper class. All right, and this is a project which is built from the database. So you see, it has a class that represents a camper. It has a bunch of attributes, getters, setters, constructors, all the basics, but it also has these annotations. And these tell Spring a lot about the database table. All right, so first name can't be null. Size has to be between 1 and 10. It's associated with the first name column in the database table. And the table is the camper table. So there's a lot of information here. It's an entity class. So this here class is set up, it was built from the database using the entity class from database option. And so that way it can be used with Spring validation because of these annotations. Okay, so I'm going to add the details from Sam here. So you see my project is running. I can log in with any username. And I have the ability to add. So whenever I apply validation is whenever I submit, click on the save button here when I'm adding a camper or editing a camper. Right. So now if I try to save, there is some validation built in. This was built in just using regular Java. We checked to see if the last name was empty. We also verified that the date was in this format and that it was within the last 16 years. This was done initially when we set up our CamperMVC project. So what we're going to do is modify this to use Spring validation based on the annotations in the entity class. All right, so the important thing is that it's up and running, and we can continue with the modifications. Okay, so if I go back to Sam, I see. So the first step is to add these details here. So I need to add the valid annotation and add the binding result. And where I put those is in the method which is invoked whenever you try to save that form. Okay? And I can find that based on if I look at my view, webinf timely folder, my camper add page. Right, so the form here at the first, right? So it's associated with a camper. But the important thing is the time leaf action. It's /camper/add submit. So what this does is says look for a controller class that has a request mapping that matches this. All right, so it's /camper, so it should be in my camper controller. And I'm looking down here for the add submit, and there it is. All right, so this method matches the request mapping. And this method is going to be invoked whenever we click on that save button. Okay, so what I'm going to do is modify this method. All right, it's important to put this at the end of the method parameters. Right? We get some errors. It creates an invalid URL if we put it at the start sometimes. So safer just to put it back here. All right, so there's a couple changes. I need to add the valid annotation. That says that, all right, you're getting this here model attribute coming in from the form, right? Based on the input fields on the form, this camper object gets generated. But you want to, this is telling Spring to validate that. And you inject a binding result object into the method if there are, and what happens is if there are any errors validating this object, then they will be contained inside this object. I think I need to add the import for the valid annotation, and I also need to add the import for the binding result. All right, so that's the first step. Second step is to handle it. So if there is an error in the binding result, I need to handle it. I don't want to continue on with my update and update the database, or try to update the database. I know that there's errors, so I want to send them back to the add page. What this does, it says if the binding result, the result object, has errors, I just throw a little message in the console and I send them back to the add page. Alright, so what this does is if there are any errors applied whenever trying to validate, I have an error here. Oh, sorry, two comments there. If there are any errors validating this camper object, they'll be contained in here, and then this check will allow me to see them and send me back to the add page. So I'll come back there, and that brings us to the third piece. Is back in my view, I want to display those errors. All right, and that's part down here. All right, so first off, I'm just going to copy that and put it on my view page. So in the HTML here, inside the form, I'm just going to put them after this hidden field. I'll Shift F for format that. All right, so what this is going to do is if there are any errors associated with the first name, then they're going to show up here. All right, the first thing I want to do is run this project, see if the Spring validation is taking over now. What you'll see is, you see I'm sending them back to the add before I continue on even doing the other validation that I put in, which validated the date of birth. It also checked for an empty first name and last name, but I'm sort of bypassing that. So if I have any Spring errors for now, I'm just going to go straight back to the add page. All right, so not sure if I ran that or not. I'll run it again, and we should see that the if I don't put in a first name or a last name or a date of birth, or if well, the date of birth is a little different, right? If I look at the date of birth, it just has, it doesn't have a not null because it's not required as far as the database is concerned. Only thing the database cares about is that it's not longer than 10 characters. All right, so those things will trigger the validation. All right, so it redeployed, it sent me, it invalidated my session, and I log back in. I'm going to try to edit. All right, so if I save now, I should see a message associated with the first name. Oh, that is still the old stuff. All right. All right, so I'm going to make sure that this, I'm just going to give it one more try. Nope, so it's not deployed. So the first thing I'm going to do is come back. I'm just going to kill, you might have seen me do this several times. I'm going to kill my Tomcat session and reboot the project. Right, so I'm just going to my task manager. I'm going to go look for my Java. All right, so this here is my Tomcat running, Java platform SE binary. I'm just going to end that. Right, I'm going to make sure that I rebuild my project. And I'll let that run. So once I get my latest stuff out on Tomcat, it should work better. All right, so okay, so I'm back. I paused the video there for 2 or 3 minutes, waiting for. So I rebuilt the project and redeployed it. So now whenever I come into my project, I can log in. When I click the Add button, right, if I don't put any data in, it's going to apply validation to these 3 fields, the input attributes of the camper. All right, you see now I'm only getting the one message associated with the first name. And that's because on my view page, all right, so in the syntax where it says if there are any errors associated with the first name, then loop through each error associated with first name and display them. All right, so the error that comes out is size must be between 1 and 10. That's because my first name is a required field and the size has to be between 1 and 10. All right, so I'm going to modify the view a little bit. I'm going to put that, like these errors are associated with first name. So I might as well put that down with the first name field. Formats it. All right, so that'll put any errors that are associated with first name with the first name. While I'm at it, ones that are associated with last name down here with the last name. You notice whenever I didn't check, like to send them back to the add page, I sent them back if there are any errors, not just the ones with first name. Right, so that's the last name, and if there are any associated with date of birth, down here with the date of birth. Now, the date of birth validation is going to be if there's more than 10 characters. Right? It's still not required. Let's just refresh that and see what it looks like. There it is. So you see there's no error with an empty date of birth as far as spring is concerned, because that an empty string is okay to go into the database for the date of birth. Right? But first name has to be here. If I put one of them, you'll see it still sends me back for the last name error. Right, and if I put in the last name, then it'll continue on. But you'll see what it'll do is, remember we still had other validation in here. All right, so I'll get back, there'll be no more spring errors, but there will be validation errors that we provided. And you'll see they're picked up just like normal. All right, you see, so now I do have an error because we added extra validation with applying business logic to it. Right, so if it's 2000, remember it had to be, so 1999-01-01, this is still an invalid date of birth because they had to be born in the last 16 years, and that is controlled by our validate camper method. All right, so I can modify this a bit. I don't need this method to worry about the is empty because that's picked up by the spring validation, but I do want to apply the extra validation on the date of birth. So I'm checking the formatting. And I'm also checking that they're born in the last 16 years. All right, so that'll still come back here and give me some more errors. So I want to do a little more Java work here. You see, I want to check all my validation at once. All right, so I'm just going to move my flag up here. All right, say initially there's no errors, but instead of going directly back to the add page, if there's spring errors, I want to just trip the flag and say there are errors. Right, so there are errors. There are. Continue on. Get the errors associated with the date of birth. Right. Set the true if there's any errors associated with the date of birth. And then what I do is the spring errors. They'll be available to me the way they were before without putting anything into the model. I can use these field errors. They're just automatically put in the model for me. But what I want to do is take these other errors. Right? These ones are the ones that are associated with the date of birth. So I'm just going to call them DOB errors. Right? So I'm just going to throw that. This might be, if there were no errors came back from this method, this will just be an empty array list. But that's fine. It'll just won't anything to loop through. But there still could be errors from the Spring validation. Okay, so I'm gonna, if there are any errors at all, Spring or business logic, send them back to the add page, and then display the errors on the page. All right, so I've already modified this to show the Spring errors up top here. All right, here's the this is where I was displaying the these custom errors that are coming from the business logic validation. Right? These are only associated with date of birth now, so let's move them down with the date of birth as well. To them from here, I'm going to add to my date of birth section. All right, so I'm using an unordered list for the errors associated with Spring, so I might as well use an unordered list for the to show the ones that were checked based on the business logic validation. Right, so I'm just going to create a line item. Right, so what this is saying is create a line item for each message in DOB errors. Put the appropriate message. I just refactored that to be a unordered list instead of a paragraph. All right, so that should work. All right, so that was just an HTML change. I did make some Java changes over here. All right, so I'm going to redeploy the app and see if the new changes take effect. And then I've completed the Spring validation that I want to do for the camper project when adding a camper. All right, so I'm just going to wait for that to run. I'll pause this for a sec. Okay, so we're back. The modification is redeployed, but the application has been deployed. So I'm just going to log in. All right, try to add. So initially I add. It's going to validate all three of these with both Spring validation and the business rules validation. So see now I get a date must be in YYYYMMDD format. First name is needed. John. All right, so I try to save that. Still getting validation. If I put a date that's too old, right format, I still get a validation error based on this business rule that we implemented. But if he's born in 2002 or 2015, all right, there should be no validation errors and this guy should save. All right, it continued on. He's been added to the database as camper ID 6. All right, so that's the way we implement validation. So hope this helped a bit and see you later.